and welcome to this very special question and answer session today. My name is Peter Tormey from the Widening Participation Team here at Edinburgh Napier University, and I'm delighted to be joined by Liam McCabe from Standalone as we celebrate Estranged Students Solidarity Week 2021. Liam, how are you keeping today?
Not bad, Peter, not bad. Glad to be here with you here on Napier's, your digital Napier campus thing. I don't know. Nonetheless, I'm really pleased to be here spending Estranged Students Solidarity Week talking about this important stuff with you.
Yeah, thank you, Liam. As you mentioned there, we're using some of our resources, so we're streaming live on Facebook and also on YouTube, which is a really good prompt for me to remind everyone who's joined us today that they can leave comments and questions, and we'll hopefully get to them by the end of this session today. So Liam, you work with at Standalone, which is a national charity. Could you tell us a little bit about the work that Standalone deliver and who you work with?
Fantastic. No, that absolutely, Peter. So Standalone, as a charity, we actually, at the beginning of this week on this Monday, celebrated the 10th anniversary of Standalone's founding as well, as it being the beginning of our Estranged Students Solidarity Week. So Standalone's been around for a while, and we've been really active probably for the last kind of 7 or so years. And then moreover, we've been active in the higher education sector for probably 3 or 4, and active in Scottish higher education for about 2 or 3 now. We are a charity which primarily represents the interests of estranged persons, across the UK in various different contexts. We do various different things, like we provide counselling, we provide peer, provide counselling-led, expert counselling-led peer support services to improve and enhance the well-being and to provide kind of shared communal support to go through the difficult experience of estrangement that people oftentimes face. And we also have a whole component of our charity called Standalone HE, which, as the name implies, higher education, specifically works to support students who are in higher education across UK institutions who unfortunately find themselves to be estranged too, given all the difficulties that can pose to them. In Scotland, I tend not to go on about Standalone HE because I, in my job as policy officer here, I'm very active across both the college sector and the university sector, further education and higher education, because we recognise that our system in this neck of the woods is a little bit more tertiary and integrated than it is perhaps in other parts of these islands. So that is kind of the approach that we take. I suppose very briefly, it would behoove me to mention as well, Peter, when I say estranged and estranged persons, and what people, for those who are watching this who might not be familiar with the terminology, what I mean by that is estrangement is the process, is the situation someone finds themselves in when they have no meaningful contact with their family. That can be a consequence of a serious breakdown in a relationship, whether that's because of really unfortunate forms of abuse or just serial disagreements about worldview, about beliefs, about religion, about identity, or whatever else it might be, or even just major personality differences. And that can happen to anyone at any age. But as you can imagine from the job that I do and the area that I work in, it primarily tends to be students, younger or youngish students who have become estranged from their family at a point where they cannot be deemed, where they can't then be looked after by the state, and therefore there is a massive gap in the support which is available to them. So yeah, that's what we do. We support estranged persons across the UK, peer support, all that kind of stuff. But my job in particular is to advocate for the interests of estranged students in Scotland's colleges and universities, helping them overcome the challenges that poses to them.
That's brilliant, Liam. And I've been familiar with your work and the work of Standalone for a couple of years. I think for me, working with estranged students and students who are kind of completely independently living can have pose challenges. And what I found really interesting from Standalone's work in the last couple of years or so was some of the research that you've commissioned and conducted. And I think the figure was 1 in 5 people at some point in their life will go through a period of estrangement, which just goes to show that it could be closer to home that maybe people on this who are joined today maybe aren't fully aware of. So I suppose, Liam, we're joined today to maybe promote the Estranged Students Solidarity Week, which I think has been running since 2017, and I know it's gathering momentum and building year on year. Could you describe one of the main aims for Estranged Students Solidarity Week?
Yeah, well, Estranged Students Solidarity Week is primarily designed to kind of do what it says on the tin. It is a week where we, as a charity, which are experts in this field, seek to, raise awareness about the issues of estrangement, the challenges that it poses to those who experience it. Those students who experience it, again, as I said, to close the name, and for all those different things, and over the course of this week, we work with colleges, we work with universities, we work with students associations and student unions, we work with national partners, government, and various different other stakeholders and partners that we work with on a regular basis, to kind of really drill home the message that this is an issue that people need to be cognizant of. This is an issue that people need to be aware of, and this is something that people actually can do something about. Apologies if you hear some barking in the background, like streaming, working from home is a whole thing. But fundamentally, this is a week where we kind of drill down into the realities of this situation, raise awareness of it, but I think more importantly, actually take action to raise that awareness, take action to kind of, demonstrate what the problems are, and take action to try and win meaningful change for those students, so that we're not just raising awareness about the challenges that they face, but actually progressing the solutions which will, free them from, the various different challenges that are posed by the gaps which exist in the system, and the absence of meaningful support, which sometimes plagues them and really makes it difficult for them, not just to get into education, but to get through education and out the other end, so they can really benefit from the life-changing experiences that colleges and universities across the country provide.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for me, in terms of Edinburgh Napier's work, what we're really trying to build momentum on is a lot of the students that we work with in the widening participation team and across the university as a whole. A lot of the information we'll gather when students join the university. But as we described, estrangement can happen at any point in a student's time at university. So Estranged Students Solidarity Week, from my perspective and from Napier's perspective, is about building information about it, promoting it, because estrangement could happen, as we said, at any point in a student's life or in a young person's life. So it's really important. I suppose, Liam, if we kind of just change direction just slightly, I know the main aim is around accessing university, accessing college study for students with estrangement and students without family support. If you could provide maybe a bit of background, a bit of context of some of the main challenges that estranged students experience when they're in accessing tertiary education in Scotland and across the UK.
Sure. I think, as you've already touched on, that it is a much more prevalent issue than most people probably realise. There is a level of people will know estranged persons, even though they might not know them. They might not know them as estranged, as in that terminology, which is quite technical language that we use in, the third sector, the charitable sector, in standalone, in and around colleges and universities as a category. But it's not just people who know estranged persons who don't know their people they know to be estranged. It's estranged persons themselves who might not know that language as well. So, that's why the awareness component of Estranged Students Solidarity Week is really important, because it's still a piece of terminology which isn't out there as much as other comparable terms and classifications, which are more well known and do then lead to more people being aware of the circumstances they find themselves in and seeking support based on the fact that their difficulties and challenges are recognised. A prominent comparable example is care experienced students, or care leavers, or anyone who's been involved or engaged with the care system in any kind of meaningful way like that. But when it comes to the main challenges which are posed by estrangement, I think it's one of those ones where, we could be here all day, talking about that and kind of outlining that. But I suppose the best way I can get people watching, from whatever you're watching, to kind of consider how this might be a difficulty, how this might be a challenge, is to put yourself in the shoes of someone who's trying to go to college or trying to go to university. And I'm, assuming we are streaming on Napier's social media, so I'm assuming that most people who are watching will have some kind of association with the university process. Imagine how much more challenging that would have been if you did not have the support of your parents or your family. Whether that was, when you were first moving into your halls of residence when you entered into first year. You don't have someone to drive you there, don't have someone to turn up to the campus with you, don't have someone to kind of, fill your boot with your suitcases and all your stuff and your various accoutrements to kind of decorate your room and personalize it and make it your own, someone to help you carry your bags up all those stairs into your new flat, someone to kind of, be there with you when you're a bit nervous, you don't really know when you're living with you, and any of your flatmates, etc. imagine that stuff. But all the way, imagine not having, and before you go into university, someone in your family around you who has maybe previous experience with that process, or with university or with college, who could fill you in and prepare you for some of those things that you might otherwise not know about. And if you don't have that kind of lead in, if you don't have that leg up, then it then means when you go to university or college, it's a completely alien environment, completely new experience, and you don't know much about it, and you're relying on, and you're hoping that colleges and universities are well organized enough to anticipate this, recognize and identify students who need that help and get it to them. But in many cases, unfortunately, not every university or college will get that absolutely right, and that will not be the case. So it's that kind of simple stuff about just getting into and starting at university or college, which, like can be a major difficulty. But there is so much more than that. And unfortunately, the impact of these major difficulties can be felt in a really serious way. The two, like I said, we could be here all day, but I'll mention two of the biggest issues that I think as policy officer, Estranged students are currently facing. And that is the issues of student finance, and that is the issue of accommodation. Firstly, when I talk about finance, and what I mean by that is, as a lot of students will probably know if they're watching this, when you are applying to SAS, the Student Awards Agency for Scotland, for those who might not be familiar, to get your your student loan and your bursary and all that sorted out, and get to get the ratios for how much of that's going to be debt and versus how much of that's going to be non-repayable bursary. What do you do to kind of make sure you can be registered as registered in that process? And if you're not an independent student, if you're still got some kind of association and affiliation with your parents, you have to evidence their income. But if you don't have a relationship with your parents, you can't evidence their income. You can't access that kind of documentation. You can't access that. You can't access any of that. And so it leads to a situation whereby estranged students are forced to register as independent students, which unfortunately means that independent students, generally there is an assumption built into the category of of students within SAS's system, that if you are an independent student, that means that you are probably mature, you're probably financially stable, and you're re-entering education, at a later point in your life, or something like that. Because how they construct that support package is they construct it in such a way that when you're going into education, you will leave it with a greater share of the money that you took out to help you with that in debt than those students who are receiving support from parents who are from less advantaged backgrounds. And even then, even the more affluent students who are still accessing student finance and student support through SAS, like the amount of debt that they will accrue as part of that process, even evidencing greater parental income on their part, they will still have comparable levels of debt at the end of that process as an independent student, even though that independent student category is, and the assumptions which underlie it are extremely outdated. Because that means that if you're an estranged student, you're 17, 18, 19, early 20s, you're still trying to get yourself sorted after the almost always cataclysmic and life-changing experience of becoming estranged from important people in your life. You're still trying to firm up your foundations. You're still trying to build for yourself a foundation from which you can move forward in your life, which means you're probably not going to be financially stable really at that point. And there is an expectation that you are going to be able to go into education and walk out with more debt than other students, and more debt than your peers who find themselves in less challenging circumstances, and that's going to be totally okay and isn't going to hamstring you in the longer term, when I think most reasonable people can see that would probably be the case. And the second issue that's probably worth pointing out, just to kind of make sure I'm not going on forever on this particular point, is accommodation. Another thing that people will take for granted when they go to college or university is, once you've been to kind of your university halls of residence and all that kind of stuff, there is in your first year, maybe even your second year as well, what do most people do? They find some pals, they find some friends. A lot of time they'll try and move out and into the private rented sector so they can get different kinds of options, more comfortable conditions, the protections that come with tenancy agreements under the most recent Scottish law, things like that. But in order to access that kind of accommodation, generally speaking, you need a guarantor. You or several or all of the people that you're going into that process with will require a guarantor. And who usually acts as a guarantor for most students in most circumstances? It's a mother, it's a father, it's a financially stable adult in your family. And again, if you don't have relationships with people in your family, which mean if you don't have communication, with that with those kind of figures in your life, those kind of people from your family, it almost always means that you're not receiving any kind of meaningful support from them either. And that includes them acting as a guarantor on your behalf when it comes to accessing accommodation in the private rented sector. And so it means that not only are these students, as we've covered already, financially cash strapped, generally speaking, they are then going to struggle to get a guarantor to get access to accommodation. And if you don't have a guarantor, most landlords or letting agents will ask for you to give them several months of rent up front, which can sometimes be, well in excess of £1,000, depending on where you're living and the conditions and all that in the place, depending on which city you're in, the size of the accommodation, how many people you're sharing it with, etc. And if you already don't have a lot of money, you're certainly not going to have a few £1,000s, squirreled away in an ISA somewhere, to kind of pay for a massive deposit. And then that then pushes them into the hands of, pushes them back into university or college accommodation or purpose-built student accommodation, which tends to be a little bit more expensive than would be the case if you were sharing in the private rented sector with other students. Or even worse still, it pushes them into the hands of predatory private companies who'll say, sure, we can offer you a guarantor, but you were going to have to pay as a premium. It won't be as much as several months' rent, but it's still predatory. They're still preying on vulnerable students, and that's something that we as Standalone really want to see resolved. Thankfully, and I'll conclude on this point on this, Peter, on both those issues, we really went into the May elections, the Scottish parliamentary elections, all guns blazing, demanding a package of bespoke support for estranged students that was no less generous than the Care Experience bursary, which currently exists for students who find themselves in comparable but different and meaningful ways experiences. And we went in all guns blazing asking for guarantor schemes to be instituted at every college and university in Scotland. And we know that Napier is one of the very few universities in Scotland which has a guarantor scheme to speak of. And so we're asking other institutions to kind of belly up to the bar and do the same thing that Napier is doing, and dare I say even challenge Napier to improve the provision and broaden the provision that you currently have as well through the exchange of best practice and that national dialogue. And thankfully we were successful in getting both parties that are now in government to include those things in their manifestos, and we are progressing those things in a meaningful way in policy conversations with civil servants as we speak. So that we're moving in the right direction despite the scale of the challenges that estranged students face. And it's only my hope that we can get as many of these things done as quickly as we can, and dare I even say it, in time for the next academic year, because wouldn't that just be great?
Yeah, Liam, you're right. That would be absolutely fantastic if we can get a broader package of support in place by next academic year. I suppose, Liam, really interesting point you mentioned there around guarantor schemes, financial support, and what I know, my colleagues in the widening participation team at Napier and colleagues across the university knows that these particular challenges often occur in August, September of a student joining the university. So it's a very stressful time. It's an uncertain time. So obviously that amplifies and can increase that kind of stress and anxiety that students may not have their funding secured, they may not have their accommodation secured. So essentially kind of leads on nicely to my next point in terms of what more could universities do. You kind of touched on some aspects in your previous answer, but if there's kind of one simple step that more universities could do to engage and support estranged students at application stage and also on course during their studies, what kind of steps would you suggest or would you advocate for?
Well, I think the biggest thing that is in the power of all colleges and universities to do, as I just spoke about, at length just there, is have a guarantor scheme. It is massively important that I think everybody knows that if you don't have a reliable roof over your head, if you do not have confidence that you're going to be able to access shelter affordably and consistently and reliably, then nothing else in your life can fall into place. Everything else requires you to have a base of operations from which you can go about your business, whether it's your education, whether it's your work, whether it's your leisure, whatever it might be. That's just as true for estranged students as it is for anybody else. And college and universities are in the not necessarily in the most enviable financial position right now. We know there's been, pretty significant cutbacks in college and university budgets over the course of the last 10 years, affording to austerity and a whole bunch of other political stuff that people will inevitably disagree about the nature and the origin of. But I'm not super concerned about that in this job. I'm more concerned about what we can actually do right now to solve these problems. And while colleges and universities might not have a lot of money for a lot of things, we're not asking colleges and universities to spend huge amounts of money to kind of, to give to students and grant for accommodation or whatever it might be. All we're asking to do is take on a little bit of risk for some of the most vulnerable students, acting as that guarantor, which they absolutely can do and already do in 4 different universities across Scotland, Napier included, as I said. And in doing so, what you're doing is providing students with that peace of mind and that security, knowing that they're going to have a roof over their head, that the university or the college or the university or college has the back and is going to support them through that. To be more specific than that, what we really want to see put in place as well as support for so let me just quickly type something just so I can get the terminology completely right. We are looking primarily for universities and colleges to deliver guarantor schemes which don't have caps, so there's no caps on the amount of students that can participate in them a year, that will support them in accessing the private rented sector, and will support them in accessing the private rented sector with they will support them with people that they care about and people that they trust, like the friends that they have made, and all that kind of stuff. And that means covering joint and severally liable tenancies. Now that might be a quite a complicated term, joint and severally liable, but basically when you go into a piece of a certain accommodation and it's with multiple people, all of the guarantors for each individual living in the accommodation is technically by law responsible for all of the liabilities if something goes wrong. In the vast majority of cases, that never poses any problems. And we can understand why colleges and universities are like, no, we only want to support our student or our vulnerable student, and we don't want to be kind of providing that support to students inadvertently who might otherwise be able to access it in other places, which is not understandable proclivity. But that does then mean that for those estranged students who might want to, and think about this, for the first time, might want to and might have the chance to move into an accommodation which will be, might move into a housing situation where they're surrounded by people that care about them and where they feel safe for the first time in their life. It means then that if the university or college turns around and says, sorry, we have a scheme, but it doesn't support joint and severally liable tenancies, then that means that they are just once again finding themselves back in university halls, back in purpose-built student accommodation, which could be quite an isolating experience when they have had just a sliver of an opportunity to access that kind of experience for the first time in their life. And what a gift that would be for a college or a university to give an estranged student who may have had a turbulent home life for as long as they could remember from childhood, and for them to finally give them that peace of mind and give them that warm, safe home environment surrounded by people that love, care about, and respect them. And I think it would be, and I think that is, not just something they can do proactively, but something they can do with care and with compassion and with enthusiasm. That would be the single biggest thing all colleges and universities could do, that would have the single biggest impact on estranged students, based on what I hear from the estranged students that we work with and we support to articulate their experiences and win the kind of meaningful change they need to see in their life to improve their experiences of education. But beyond that, there's loads of other stuff they can do as well. Like when it comes to, the challenges which are posed by estrangement, it increases the mental health, the strain on the mental health of estranged students, because they are financially disadvantaged, which means they have to work more in order that they can make ends meet, but that means they've got less time for education. So it's having an impact not just on their mental health, but also on their educational output, on their educational outcomes. So given that strain that's on their mental health, place them higher on the list of prioritized students when it comes to accessing, I know it generally, very highly in demand counselling services, because they'll need it. They will be more likely to need it in many cases more than students who find themselves in less adverse circumstances. Prioritise them for that. When it comes to discretionary funding and bursaries, prioritise them for that, because again, these are the students who are going to need it most. When it comes to jobs on campus, whether that's kind of looking after the phones in the faculty office, or whether it's jobs that come up in the library, moving books about level to level and floor to floor, prioritise estranged students for that, because access to consistent employment, which with an employer which understands their circumstances, and no one would be better placed hypothetically, under those circumstances, to understand the circumstances than the university they are studying at. That makes a huge difference to them in not getting access to the shifts that they need, on on an income which makes sense for them, on an income which is sustainable and which is reliable, and is livable, quite importantly. And in making sure that they don't have to, and in streamlining the experience of their already quite difficult life and experiences that they often have. And then all that other stuff I spoke about earlier on, about just the little things as well. It's just about, it's about, having someone to help, the student move into their halls if they turn up without any parents there to help them. It's about having someone to welcome them when they turn up on campus, to give them that campus tour. If they, it's about having a peer support network, or working with the student union or the student association to kind of look out for these students, so there's somebody there, even if they're like third or fourth year or master's students, to give them kind of like, to clue them in on what campus life is like if they're coming there without having that input from family who have had those previous experiences. But all that stuff, I think, beyond that kind of structural set piece of support, guarantor schemes, bursaries, counselling, etc. That just comes from awareness. It comes from a culture change. It comes from universities and colleges recognising that while estrangement might not be a statutory category they have to look after, like care experienced students or other vulnerable groups, they should just treat them as if they are a statutory category that they have to look after. They are a category that they should be acting with the same mindset as corporate parents towards that they act towards other cohorts with similar challenges. And in doing so, by building them into all those different systems and prioritizing them in the way that kind of mindset affords to other groups, you will massively improve students' experience from the day they walk on campus to the day they walk off of it. That's just a small list. But again, it's one of those things I could go on and on about, but I think that generally covers it. Change the culture, be more aware, and things will move forward quite markedly for estranged students, especially once you've kind of put in place those central structural support pieces around mental health, well-being, finance, and accommodation.
Thanks again, Liam. That's a very passionate and exhaustive list of some of the support that we can put in place. And if I add to that, we can add in those stakeholders such as the funding agencies, the government,
absolutely, 100%.
And it's a path and it's a journey that we can all take together to, as you said, maybe make sure sport is much more integrated and kind of bespoke and personalized for students once they get to further in higher education. Time's really against us, Liam. We could talk all day, as we've done many times in the past.
As we have in the past, Peter.
We move on to maybe final questions. It's a really exciting piece of work. The Manifestos for Change project you've got at Standalone. Could you maybe give us a few moments around that? Because I think, again, looking to the future, it's a very exciting addition to Standalone's work, and hopefully, again, can get some and generate some real impact to support estranged students across the country.
Sure, no, absolutely. Just very briefly on that, like we as Standalone, certainly the higher education component of it, and we have been running for several years now. The Standalone Pledge. The Standalone Pledge is basically is a scheme in which institutions, colleges and universities across the whole of the UK, and I think over 100 of them now do it, can voluntarily say across 4 categories which Standalone has identified as being important to estranged students. We are going to do X, Y, and Z, A, B, and C, 1, 2, and 3, however you want to hypothetically categorize or number it, to improve the experience of estranged students in those different ways. We're going to start doing X in this service. We're going to start providing, like Y kind of package of support when they arrive at Z stage or whatever it might be. And in doing so, they are outlining that they are aware of the issue, that they're doing something about it, and they're outlining how they're going to approach solving that problem. And they work with Standalone, accessing the expertise of myself, of my colleague Susan, of our chief executive Becca, and of our vast network of stakeholders, yourself obviously included, Peter, to kind of make sure they can iron out the kinks in their system and provide support whenever it is possible for them to provide it. And that is generally speaking very successful. However, when I joined the organisation about a year and a bit ago, my background, as much as I, work in the higher education sector, my background primarily is in student unions. I was a vice president on campus at Strathclyde. I used to be the president of the National Union of Students in Scotland. I realised, from that experience, that while universities can in many cases, do things unprompted, which are good for students. A lot of the time, like, when universities do some really majorly good things for students, they've been gently pushed in that direction by their student association or student union, to put it diplomatically. And so I thought, why not go straight to the source then? Why not work with all of the change makers and the decision makers on campus, who can feed into and make this process work? And so that's exactly what we did. We took that standalone pledge model. We adapted it, we improved it, but not improved it, like we adapted it. Adapted is the right word. We adapted it specifically for the context of student unions, recognizing they are not, massive institutions like colleges and universities, but they are democratic, they are local, they are grassroots, they are member-led, and basically changing how we speak about it, how we frame it, how we present it, and how we go about categorizing what they will be doing, and the kind of stuff that they would be getting up to, in a way which makes sense for that kind of student-led, democratic, representative environment of student unions and student associations across the country. And we have been, kind of pushing that forward. Like, we're now in a position to kind of start issuing certificates. I'll be heading over to Strathclyde Student Union on Thursday to issue the first certificate that we've issued as part of this scheme. And we are currently, Forth Valley Student Association is putting a motion to their student parliament this week, seeking democratic assent from their student council, or from their students directly, to pursue manifestos for change and get it on the docket and progress that, because they want to make sure that they have the assent of students and the enthusiasm of students at their back while they're doing it. 5 colleges looking at it as well, and the list goes on and on. And there's, of course, it's not just all in Scotland. There are other unions in other parts of the UK who are engaging with it too. So yeah, that is, like the manifestos for change. And while I've not spoken to Napier Student Association about it as yet, I'm sure that's something I will get around to doing at some point in the near future, whether that is via yourself or alongside yourself, Peter. Either or, I am perfectly happy with that.
That's brilliant, Liam. Again, that's some work that we'll definitely have to get involved with and look out for in the future. Because similar for the Standalone Pledge, could make a real impact on the lives and the experience of estranged learners studying without support at college, university. So, Liam, time has got the better of us. Before we sign off, how's it best to get in touch with yourself or with Standalone, or to kind of track progress in this area?
Fantastic. Yeah, unfortunately, again, we could talk, we could talk for ages about it, I'm sure, Peter. But if you want more information about Standalone, if you're curious about estrangement and want to know more about its origins, its impacts, and what's being done to kind of ameliorate those impacts, in Scotland's colleges and universities, or just indeed across the whole of the UK, you can find more information at our various different social medias. Like, in particular, like the best place to probably look would be Twitter, and that's twitter.com, twitter.com obviously / it's either Standalone HE or / Standalone. Standalone covers the wide breadth of activities we do, and Standalone HE is specifically stuff we're doing in Scotland's colleges and universities. We also have Instagram, which again is instagram.com / Standalone HE. I run that, so if you drop a direct message on that or drop a comment on one of our posts, then it will be me that will be kind of largely dealing with it, unless something changes there, which I don't anticipate it changing anytime soon. If you want to access me, contact me directly, I'm more than happy for you to do so. My email address is liam.mccabe@standalone.org.uk. And if you want to drop me an email about any questions, any queries you have, that would be great. Especially, by the way, if you are an estranged student, get in contact. We are always looking to kind of work with estranged students, because while I might have a lot of experience advocating for students' issues, you might be half decent at it. If these experiences are not my own, they're always so much more powerful. In fact, they're at their most powerful when they're articulated by estranged students themselves. So if you are an estranged student, or you are a student who wasn't otherwise familiar with this terminology, but all the stuff we're talking about today kind of rings some bells and kind of resonates with your experience, get in touch. We have opportunities to kind of, sometimes we have opportunities to talk to journalists, and we have opportunities to kind of speak to, people in the sector, like at events that kind of Peter and I would go to with various other practitioners, or even sometimes with kind of, senior managers of colleges and universities to raise awareness with decision makers at that level. And later this afternoon, I'm sitting down with 4 estranged students and Jamie Hepburn, the Higher Education and Further Education, Youth Employment and Services Minister, who basically is the most senior person in government, or the most directly responsible government minister for our colleges and universities and education, which takes place in the tertiary education sector. And he's taking the time, this Estranged Student Solidarity Week, to listen to students directly. So these are the kind of things you can get up to if you are estranged. And you know what, if that isn't you, but you think you know someone who this might fit, or who this sounds like, urge them to have a watch on this on Napier's Facebook and all the other social media where it might be stored afterwards. And if you're watching it now under those circumstances, drop me a line, drop me a message on Instagram, send us a tweet, and we'll get you sorted, and we'll have a conversation about what we can do with you. But yeah, that's us. Hopefully that was helpful, and that's sufficient to find me if you need to.
Well, that's more than sufficiently, and that's very helpful indeed. And I think we've all learned a lot. And as you said, please do get in touch with Liam. He'll certainly be able to support you and provide the guidance that you need. So Liam, we'll leave it there for now. Thank you so much again for joining us. And we know you've got a busy Estranged Student Solidarity Week ahead.
For sure.
So many thanks again. And again, we'll hopefully be in touch again soon. So all the best. Fantastic. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Peter. Always a pleasure.